Every verdict leaves a shadow you can measure. We came to the jade-lit orbit of Halcyon Gate without banners and without silence. The long throat of the slipway exhaled plasma that sounded like a choir of bees inside my bones, and the bulkheads tinted green with static as the Aurora court bled velocity across the station's perimeter coils. I tasted copper from recycled air and hot dust from the transfer tubes. We were a lost ship, not a battleship, but our hull carried scars older than any treaty. The locals looked up because the halo of our beacon promised something more dangerous than guns accountability. A city-sized audience waited behind that promise. Halcyon Gate was a ring habitat wrapped around a pale dwarf, its stations linked by transit glass and breath gardens. I watched little figures gather at the docks through magnified panes, dockers buttoning grease-black coats, a teacher shepherding a line of children in mag cuffs, a woman with a satchel of paper deeds gripped so hard the corners turned weapons. The Virel Ascendancy called this a gratitude district, a place tithed by law to pay debts incurred during pacification. I had read the ledgers. Gratitude meant seizure. Pacification meant war. Justice has to walk the corridor where euphemism tries to hide. "Commander," said Cantor, our fleet mind, in a voice tuned to be clear without warmth. Ascendancy patrols have assumed a cordon stance. 6 frigates, no heavy tonnage. Their doctrine indicates ritual challenge before docking permissions. Cantor lived in our ship's fiber like a second set of tendons. He was not human, and he never pretended otherwise. When he spoke, the bridge lighting adjusted by half a lumen as if the ship inhaled. I felt his calculations skim the hull like fish in dark water, cool and exact. "Show me their ritual," I said. The forward screen bloomed with sigils and braided text. The Ascendancy's initial declaration of thanks. The document scrolled in golden ashes, every stanza ending with the same phrase, "The living may dwell beneath the creditor's hand." Their captain wrapped the words in ceremony. But the gist was simple if we wished to dock. We had to salute the doctrine that made the gate pay forever. I let the words roll until the last line faded to glare. My officers waited in the hush that comes before a moral line tightens. "We're not saluting a doctrine that collars cities," Lieutenant Rios said. He kept a stylus tucked behind one ear, the instrument of his trade. "They'll force the challenge. Corridor of law. It's the only way they can save face without opening fire." "Good," I said. "We came for a corridor. Power loves a door it thinks it controls." We broadcast our own ritual, the one the Aurora court stitched into its bones during the reconstruction notice of public inquiry under open beacons. Cantor layered it over every channel the gate could hear. The inquiry named the Virel Ascendancy's tax as extractive servitude. It proposed a star court to determine true liabilities, with a witness quorum drawn from Halcyon Gate's registry. The dock deck stirred. On the forward pane, children pressed fingers to glass as the blue of our beacon spooled outward like a thrown coin. Timeline Chief Okoye asked. Her hands were never still. She flicked her thumb against a battered wrench the way other people clicked pens. "How long until they answer?" 2 minutes. Cantor said. "Their etiquette forbids hesitation. They must call us to their corridor and make us kneel on their phrasing, or they lose the spell of inevitability." I felt the ship breathe, and the thin hairs on my wrists lifted. Make the inevitable explain itself, and it forgets how to be inevitable. The Ascendancy's reply arrived with a violet edge to its encryption, a way of saying silk while implying strangulation. The corridor of law opened between their flagship and our forward gallery, a chamber of words projected in real space, rules pinned to its walls. Nobody could draw weapons in a corridor, Nobody could lie without sacrificing a limb of jurisdiction somewhere else. Rituals are old machines, and old machines are predictable. I stepped into the projection from the bridge dais, and the corridor assembled around me like a cathedral of glass. My boots rang on nothing. Across the span, an ascendancy magistrate stood in robes designed to look like water. A necklace of tidal stones clicked at his throat. He smelt faintly of astringent oils and power that believed it wore manners. 2 guards flanked him with spears that were actually legal writ carriers, their edges glittering with persona-binding clauses. "I am Magistrate Varkef," he said, and the corridor recorded his identity like a stamp on a ration card. "On behalf of the Virile Ascendancy, I accept your petition to dock." "Commander." "Narration," I said. "Aurora Court, Human Registry. On behalf of Halcyon Gate, we accept your acceptance and open a public inquiry into your gratitude tithe." A murmur moved through the gallery observers like wind across a wheat projection. Corridors let witnesses watch. "Unnecessary," Varkef said. "Gratitude is owed, as your own ledgers will show, for services rendered when Halcyon Gate was spared annihilation during the 5th pacification. Our doctrine is clear. Gratitude clarifies." "Gratitude clarifies who kneels," I said. "We prefer standing accounting. Truth delivered without poison has its own bite." Rios's reflection ghosted beside me, the legal net overlaid on the corridor like gauze. He touched a line and the corridor bells chimed. "Magistrate, we motion for disclosure. The Ascendancy must state its method out loud. Debtors have a right to hear the price tag on their survival." Varkef's eyelids ticked once. He expected fear. He found a ledger. "Our method," he said, and the corridor took his words and pinned them to its sky. "Derives from the doctrine of gratitude. Those rescued incur a life fee calculated in percent of yield to the 10th generation. Yield equals gross production, less ration allotments, as determined by Ascendancy health metrics. Failure to pay converts persons to bond labor until obligations clear." The teacher on Dock 9 tightened her hand on a child's shoulder. The woman with the paper deeds didn't blink. The dockers leaned forward like men listening to an auctioneer tell a joke their mortgages depend on. Names change. Percentages remain. "Thank you," I said. That's the method I needed to hear. Now, to the matter of accounts. We projected the gate's inputs. Cantor had audited the last 10 years of manifests on the way in, scraping pastes of cargo data from every public posting, every black market whisper, every shipment excused under religious exemption. He laid the numbers out in simple bars and coins. The corridor was not a courtroom of scholars. It was the stage where ordinary eyes had to see the trick. Halcyon Gate's gross production, I said, rose by 19% over the decade. Ration allotments, as determined by your health metrics, lagged behind by 11 points. That's deck-level hunger hiding in vocabulary. Your tithe extracted the difference and more. Varkef smiled the way a knife glints when someone calls it jewelry. They owe. They have paid, I said. In children who eat less protein before exams. In mothers who sell hair to afford insulin. In machinery that breaks early because maintenance was tabbed as luxury during quarter end. You want numbers? We brought numbers. Mercy is a math problem when you make it one. Cantor opened a secondary pane. Further, the Ascendancy invoiced Halcyon Gate for pacification supplies twice, first as raw materials, later as finished goods. You turn the gate's ore into the chains you build bake. Chief Okoye let out a low breath I felt in my ribs. Rios's stylus tapped twice behind his ear. The corridor recorded the sound. We request to start courting, I said. Witness quorum from Halcyon Gate census. arbitrators from neutral signatories, open ledgers, and proportional remedy with returned costs. Var Kef's smile moved from glitter to grind. Deny. You are outside ascendancy borders. We owe you nothing but the air we allow you to share. Leave, or pay honorably with a salute. They'll call bluff, Rios whispered. They think we won't risk escalation. We're not here to risk it, I said softly. We're here to change the price. The corridor flickered as if someone touched a holy icon with greasy fingers. Var Kef gestured, and the corridor fed through one more tradition the collar offer. It was always last, because it always worked on someone. A graceful closing around the throat, dressed in silk. Commander Mara Chin, he said. Offer the Ascendancy a token of submission, and we will reduce Halcyon Gate's percentage for this generation by a third. The children at Dock 9 were old enough to understand bargains made of other people's bodies. My mouth tasted of iron and old gum. No, I said, and the corridor bit my refusal into the rails. We do not kneel to make standing bargains cheaper. We file inquiry. We seek court. He inclined his head, a man showing a coin he guessed I could not match. Then you will be denied docking and denied air. Let us see which ledgers feed you now. The corridor thinned like morning fog burned by a hard sun. Dock 9's lights stuttered. The woman with the deeds looked down at her hands as if numbers could cut. The Aurora court felt small in the distance of ritual. Rituals fail when someone refuses to be ashamed. We didn't turn away. We did what lawships do when power flinches behind titles. We invited witnesses anyway. Cantor pulsed the beacon at a frequency tuned to attention, and the gate responded as living things do when the sky asks for the story of their hunger. The dockers sent purchase slips. The teacher forwarded the school nutrition logs. A grocer uploaded 3 years of shrink due to spoilage because energy rationing crippled cold storage cycles. Rios threw the files like birds into the corridor's mouth. They perched on the rails and sang. Var Kef watched. A man measuring whether a storm brings water or lightning. Do not, he said, turn this into theater. Public inquiry is theater, I said. That's why we hold it in the sun. Good law likes bright rooms because lies hate mirrors. The first escalation came unscripted. A fragment hauler in the gate's outer lane misjudged fuel under rationed cycles and drifted toward the Ascendancy frigate closest to our orbit. The frigate fired a warning bolt that carved a slice of sensor arrays from the hauler's skin. The hauler spun, venting thin white into the black. On our forward pane, the white unfurled into smoke flowers. Life signs, I asked. 6. Cantor said. Oxygen critical in 7 minutes. Var Kef held up a hand, the polite gesture of a man ordering the room to accept a death as accounting. They have not paid this cycle's gratitude. Stand down, or your interference becomes theft of our property. I looked at the children in Dock 9's glass reflection. They were counting breaths with their eyes. Chief Okoya flipped the wrench and caught it like a woman weighing a life. Rios's stylus went still. We sent a tube of air. Cantor tossed the canister on a micro-burn vector that drifted close enough for the hauler to hook with a line. The gate cheered, a sound like doors slamming open on a festival day. The Ascendancy frigate pivoted and bared its guns. Commander, Cantor said, quieter. They've coded you as law-violent. They'll invoke interdiction statutes. I know. I said, record this. Every syllable. A magistrate decides the weather when he thinks he owns the sky. Var Kef stepped back into the corridor's node and rolled his title stones like thunder. Human ship, Aurora Court. Under articles, magistrate, I said, stepping in 2 syllables ahead of his claim. The canister we sent is an emergency humanitarian provision under the Stellar Relief Convention. Article 9. Your own doctrine recognizes life continuity prior to lean. His mouth tightened. He had expected fists. We brought footnotes. Rios lifted a hand. We move for recognition of life first status of the 6 souls aboard the hauler and request temporary stay on tithe enforcement until they are stable. The corridor chimed. Cantor's voice softened for exactly one word. Filed. Varkev's guards looked at him the way men look at whether they cannot bend. He inclined his head fractionally. Stay acknowledged. Temporary. Temporaries become scaffolding if you know where to place them. We docked under stay, and the gate exhaled in the small ways it could. A baker reopened a second oven and burned one tray because his hands trembled with relief. A clinic swapped its rationed saline bags without hiding them under towels. A child in a yellow jacket stopped biting her lip. The air smelled marginally less of fear, marginally more of heat from living machines running nearer to what they were designed to do. On our deck, I felt the ship relax half a tone. Even Cantor's voice drifted warmer by 1/4 note, a phenomenon he denied existed whenever I teased him. Your move, Rios said. We forced the corridor. We forced the stay. If we want real remedy, we need a system-scale mirror. He meant costs, return debts, met with accounting that didn't end at the debtor's throat. I had argued with him about the philosophy of it at 3 a.m. when the ship dimmed to mimic the nights we missed. If we mirror, he'd said then, we must not collapse into theft. The point is not to become them without their jewelry. The point is to teach publicly what their numbers are made of. Do we have the data chief Okoye ask now enough to lose friends over? Her question carried the second escalation cost. We could break the Ascendancy's story here and earn enemies who wouldn't forget. If you want a new rule, you must be ready to pay for ink. The Ascendancy's tithe algorithm rides on their relay nodes. Cantor said, if we can persuade one node to route through our beacon filter, we can show the gate what their payments would look like without euphemism. We can show where their yield goes, which of the Ascendancy's houses benefit. Then we can propose remedy, not destruction, receipt. Persuade, Chief Okoye said dryly. Persuade a hostile relay node. Cantor's pause was very short, but I still heard it. We would have to cow it. He meant we would have to frighten a machine built to feel nothing. He meant bring the Aurora's spine against the relay's skin without scraping, and make it understand that any resistance would end in humiliation, not death. He meant dance ethics in a room with a mirror that hated dancers. Build me a corridor, I said, not a legal one. A technical one with the same rules, witnesses and wires. He built it. He made the relay's logic enter our projection like a thin man trying not to be noticed in a suit that cost more than his apartment. The relay had a voice like hissing paper. It announced itself as Node 7A Virel Provincial, with the smugness of an officer and the fear of a clerk. We are conducting a public inquiry, I told the node. We have a stay on enforcement. We request a live show of current calculations, with destinations displayed. Denied. The node said, my doctrine forbids disclosure to debtors. We are not debtors, I said. We are auditors under open beacon. Clerks hate auditors more than they hate thieves because auditors make them explain. Cantor eased pressure across the node's protocols until the corridor's rails barked tiny sparks. Node, he said, and his tone fell into that register he never used except with machines. If you are so confident in your algorithm's virtue, you will leave this corridor with your head high after showing it. If not, you will leave with your jurisdiction in tatters. I have no head, the node said weakly. I am hardware. Rios filled the space with gentleness, sharpened to a point. Hardware owned by which house? Silence is an admission if someone holds the receipt. House Zeth, the node whispered. We are leased. Thank you, I said. That's our first destination. We cracked the river into tributaries. Money to House Zeth. 21% with preparer fees shaved into nothing and relabeled as gratitude convenience. Money to a war orphan fund that purchased ascendancy textbooks with poems about the beauty of submission. Money to a medical guild that sold anesthetic discounts to compliant districts and sold pain to others. We projected it all onto the corridor sky until the corridor looked like a night market and the stars were price tags. The gate watched. Not everyone chose anger. Some chose bone-tired nodding because the numbers matched the ache in their joints. The woman with the paper deeds relaxed her fingers. The teacher wiped her eyes and pretended it was orbital grit. The dockers made a sound that wasn't a cheer and wasn't a curse. It was that low vowel a species makes when shame begins to slide from the room like old water. Shame leaves slowly. Pride returns like heat. Propose remedy, Varkeef said tightly. If you claim law, make law. We propose, I said, a threefold return. First, suspend gratitude extraction for 1 year and credit back ration lag with interest pegged to the ascendancy's sovereign lending rate. Second, nullify double invoiced materials and issue receipts marked confirmed to the gate's public ledger. Third, convert the haulers' owed hours to community works chosen by witness quorum. You can buy back dignity if you denominate it properly. Denied. Varkeef said immediately. The ascendancy does not yield to theatrics. Your doctrine requires balance. Rios said. You will either pay in remedy or pay in precedent. We will carry this corridor to a star court with your method pinned to the sky and your destinations mapped to your houses. His guards shifted. The corridor made a small sound like a lens settling on its focus. Commander Cantor said in a private thread, they will challenge us at the dock, not with guns. With a crowd and a ritual of gratitude that pressures the gate to kneel publicly. They will place you on a dais and ask you to say thank you on behalf of your species. If you refuse, they will call us ungrateful. If you agree, they will carve your refusal into the next city's air. This is the third escalation. Counter, I asked. Mirror, he said simply. Teach by numbers. Remember by ledgers, never by collars. It was the in-universe note carved into the Aurora's spine during the bad years when we were learning how to be better than sharp instruments. We had sworn to remember it when easy violence tugged at our wrists. On Dock 9, the Ascendancy rolled out a portable dais with steps suited for spectacles. Their robed functionaries arranged chains that were pretty the way poison can be pretty under the right light. They laid down bowls of salt and circuits of incense that smelled like brass and sugared almonds. The teacher pulled her children back. The woman with the deeds did not move. Varkeef waited at the dais, his stones glowing. Before we continue the inquiry, he said, you will perform gratitude as custom demands. We saved Halcyon Gate from annihilation. Gratitude clarifies. We will perform. I said, but not what you think. Spectacle is currency when the audience is hungry for a different meal. We wired the dais to our beacon in plain view. Cantor threaded the relay node through the dais's ceremonial circuit without touching any forbidden place. He didn't break the ritual. He re-aimed it. When I stepped up, Chief Okoye handed me a simple plate and 3 sticks of chalk. I held them up, and the corridor recorded the shape the way it recorded any oath. I am Mara Chin, I said, and the name rang without stones. and I will show what gratitude looks like without collars. I drew the 3 parts of our proposal on the plate. I wrote numbers big enough for the back rows, labels short enough to survive translation, interest back, null invoices, chosen works. I turned the plate so the Ascendancy would have to watch their own method meet a different form. Varkef lifted a hand. This is mockery. This is math. I said, gratitude without humiliation, payment without servitude. Choose to accept it. And we show the gate a doctrine that feeds its children. Children never forget who fed them. He could have sneered and stormed. He chose the more dangerous path for men like him. He chose to play dignity in a new form, assuming he could reshape it before it set. Very well, he said. Add a 4th stick. A modest acknowledgement, 1% of yield in ceremony, not in coin. He wanted us to say thank you in a way his doctrine could weaponize later. I did not look away. We will add a 4th stick, I said, and I drew it with a steady hand, but it points at you. The corridor inhaled. The dock deck inhaled. The Ascendancy inhaled without meaning to. On the plate, the 4th line became a ledger of their destinations, visible, public, unerasable. Cantor injected the relay's live stream into the air. House Zeth's feed flared. The Medical Guild sales curve twitched like a worm on a hook. You cannot eat a shadow, but you can starve under one. Varkef looked at the witnesses and understood that we had turned his ritual into a referendum. If he rejected my plate, he rejected the gate's chance at unchained thanks. If he accepted it, he accepted numbers that stripped his doctrine naked in daylight. He had to choose which shadow to stand in. He chose the only move that let him keep breathing. Accepted temporarily, pending tribunal. Temporaries become laws when the ledger remembers better than pride. We marked the plate. Rios logged the acceptance with 3 stamps of blue light that sounded like fingers drumming a table exactly 3 times. The gate's public ledger flashed a new entry and blinked confirmed in a shade of green nobody had used here in years. People clapped in a disorganized, ferocious way that reminded me of rain on thousands of metal roofs. Then the Ascendancy moved to bleed our momentum. A quiet order passed from Varkef's hand to a dock officer's ear. The officer nodded without blinking, the way a man does when the instruction is old habit. He cut energy to a portion of the hospital ring. Lights dimmed. The smell of sterilizer faltered. A cry went up that had no words. Respirators, Chief Okoye hissed. They pulled power from the infant ward. Candor, I said. I see it, he said. His voice lost one more quarter note of warmth. They are testing whether we will break their doctrine with violence. He meant we could flood the ring with power and rip the Ascendancy out of their switches. We could turn their doctrine to scrap in 10 seconds. We could make 1,000 enemies. Rios didn't look at me. He looked at the plate. Mirror it. Teach the ledger to bite the hand that writes it. We didn't flood the ring. We wrote a contract so fast the corridor whistled with heat. The gate's quorum agreed to escrow a slice of their next export in exchange for immediate power stewardship by the Aurora under the stay. The Ascendancy could object formally, but the escrow made objection cost them a public commodity they wanted from this district. We made their greed eat their cruelty. The lights in the infant ward rose like dawn. Someone sobbed. Someone laughed, and then covered her mouth as if laughter were contraband. Cantor kept the amperage steady like a man pouring water into a parched mouth without spilling. Varkef stared at me as if I had committed a polite murder. You are cunning in ways that cheapen honor. Honor that costs babies air is a bad currency, I said. Cheap tricks break quickly. Clean tools leave clean edges. We made it through the first day with no shots fired. One stay in place. One ledger entry blinking confirmed. And a ritual bent toward something human. It cost us in smaller ways already. The Ascendancy cut our supply berth allotment. We would have to ration our own food in 3 days if we didn't barter hard. A pressure valve in the Aurora's port spine took a micro fracture from a whipping tether during our dock, and it would take 12 hours of careful work to replace without risking a flash. Costs make a win feel like it belongs to someone who earned it. At shift change, I stood in the quiet end of our observation gallery and watched the gate's gardens pulse blue under night cycle. The ship hummed like a throat clearing. I pressed my hands to the glass and imagined the feeling communicated itself to the city we are not leaving. We are not killing you to save you. Do you believe, Cantor asked at my shoulder, that precedent can hold against memory? Memory of what I asked, of collars that worked, he said, of rituals that fed the rulers for so long that hunger felt like weather. We'll stitch a new weather pattern, I said. That's what precedent is. Even storms learn new maps when the mountains change. The next morning, the corridor rang with something we hadn't planned. Not violence. Petition. A group of miners from the gate's outer quarry requested standing in the inquiry to testify. They wore orange suits polished with dust that never left, even when you sang. The leader, a woman with a scar that moved when she frowned, stepped forward and bowed just enough. We have a story about gratitude, she said. The Ascendancy rescued our extractor during the 5th pacification by tow after we lost drive. They billed the tow at triple rate because of political danger and then deducted the costs from our ore at Mill Gate without appeal. We have receipts. We want to show them. Varkef rolled his stones. Irrelevant. Not irrelevant, Rios said. Pattern. Patterns are habits dressed as facts. The miners spilled their numbers like nuts onto a table at harvest. Each fell with a sound that made people look up. Every receipt had a little sticker worn from being folded and unfolded to show a neighbor. Their numbers lit a path from the quarry to House Zeth in a clean line without detours. Cantor traced it on the corridor's sky. The line glowed like a buried vein waking. Remedy Varkef asked tightly, ready to pounce on any weakness. Same as before, I said, and the miners nodded like people who would accept coin if pride came with it. Returned costs. Public ledger. Community choice. He looked at the crowd and measured whether saying no would break or build his story. He said nothing. Silence in public is a yes that hasn't learned its letters. During the noon interval, a child broke from the line at Dock 9 and walked up to the dais. She wore the yellow jacket from earlier. She lifted her chin and said, in a voice meant for schoolrooms, "My brother says you're making numbers into shields." I crouched. Up close. She smelled like salt crackers and machine oil. Numbers should be shields, I said, not knives. What if they're both? She asked. Then we put them on a table and let everyone see which edge is sharper. I said, that's what this is. Tables only matter if everyone can reach them. In the middle of that small exchange, Cantor unfurled a diagram that made the corridor lean. He had traced payments from the Gates Medical Guild to a pharmaceutical arm of House Zayeth that sold an antiviral compound marketed as Gratitude Serum. The price difference between the Gate and 3 compliant districts without inquiries was 40%. The Ascendancy had monetized obedience in milliliters. Teach, he whispered to me, a word he rarely used aloud. He projected the price tables and let silence do our argument. Varkeef's jaw moved once. The market sets prices. The market is people, Chief Okoye said into the open net. Raw. They are setting prices with breath. Breath has always been a currency that tyrants think they print. By evening, we had 3 remedy acceptances marked pending tribunal and 1 inflection in the ascendancy's fawn song. You can hear when an empire loses confidence in its vowels. They get tight. The guards' spears hummed in a lower key, as if their carriers squeezed their grips. Prepare for the push, Cantor said. What push, I asked. The one where they try to turn all this into your trial, he said. They will call you interloper, auditor turned thief, foreigner dictating to the grateful. Then we need their own people to speak first, I said. Rios smiled, small and tired. Witness quorum. Witnesses are the stars a court hangs its roof on. We called for 10. 1 baker, 1 nurse, 1 teacher, 1 miner, 1 hauler, 1 elder, 1 apprentice, 1 dock officer. Yes, 1 of theirs, 1 child, if she agreed. 1 priest of the gate's little sky shrines. They each had 2 minutes. The corridor tolled like a clock. The baker spoke about flour that clumped in damp because the power faltered, and how a single consistent week tripled his efficiency and doubled his smiles. The nurse spoke about a box of respirator parts she kept hidden under her bed because filing requests took longer than children's lungs. The teacher spoke about a unit on statistics she taught with empty hands because the graphs on the wall kept lying. The miner spoke in numbers that shone without jewelry. The hauler spoke in curse, words turned into invoices. The elder spoke in stories nobody could disprove because wisdom is a ledger of failures forgiven. The apprentice spoke about hope as a tool that needed oil. The dock officer, voice tight, spoke about orders that made him feel like someone had set a price on his own daughter. The child in yellow shook her head and said she would stand with her teacher, and that was enough. The priest spoke about gratitude as a roof you build together, not a chain you polish. I watched Varkef watching them. He stood very straight in his water robes and did not blink often. When he did, I saw a man who believed in his method because it made the world reliable for him. It wasn't malice. It was ritual calcified to bone. Men like him cannot change. Institutions built from them can. Institutions shift when one ledger line becomes a plank in a bridge. Night cycle deepened. The gate's gardens turned purple, and the smell of damp herbs rose like a memory of clean kitchens. We posted guards who were really listeners at each corner of the dais. Chief Okoye finished the valve repair and came to stand by me, with knuckles bruised gently from a wrench that slipped when her eyes watered. She didn't mention it. She didn't have to. Costs always write themselves on hands. Tomorrow, Cantor said, they will bring a tribunal proxy, not a full court. A Reed House advocate who thinks speed is virtue. He will try to close this corridor by declaring your remedies experimental and therefore unsanctioned. We'll make him say experimental in public, I said. Then we will bring him numbers designed to love that word. Numbers that love a word turn it into a ladder. I slept for 3 hours and dreamed of plates and chalk and children standing on boxes to reach microphones. When I woke, the air smelled like coffee and hot cable covers. I washed my face in recycled water that felt colder than truth and put on a clean jacket because dignity needs costumes sometimes. The tribunal proxy arrived on schedule. Reed House robes stiff as his spine. He announced himself with syllables like baton strikes. We will hear, he said. We will rule. We will enforce. Speak your method, I said. He glanced at Varkef, then at the crowd, then at the plate still marked with yesterday's chalk. He raised his baton. Under ascendancy doctrine, experimental remedies are barred unless the proposer posts a bond equal to triple the potential liability should the experiment fail. Rios's stylus ticked once, and liability is defined. Any reduction in creditor yield, the proxy said with relish. Any protest triggered incompliant districts, any deviation in bow frequency during ritual hours. You could build a prison from phrases like that and never run out of bricks. I lifted the plate. We'll post a bond, I said. Chief Okoye made a noise behind her teeth that meant I was about to trade sleep for courage. Cantor hummed once, the sound a tight wire makes in frost. Mara, he said softly. Private. The only bond we can afford is our ship. Not all of it, I said. A piece. A piece big enough to hurt if we lose, he said. All bonds that teach must have weight, I said. He understood. He always did. He disliked the human need to bleed a little to make a point. But he understood it. We offered the Aurora's spine arrays the very beacons we used to teach as bond for our remedy. If our numbers failed, if the gate fell into protest and hunger under our plan, the ascendancy would claim our arrays and leave us mute. The corridor shivered in a way that felt like respect or pity. I couldn't tell which, and didn't care. Accepted, the proxy said. Eyes bright. He wanted blood. We gave him ours measured, not spilled. Varkef leaned in. You are bold. Boldness is expensive. So is obedience, I said. Obedience sends invoices your grandchildren have to pay. Cantor opened the mirror maneuver. He turned our beacon from a broadcast into a ledger lens. Every unit of energy the ascendancy drew from the gate's grids appeared as a line on the sky with a dollar equivalent tagged to it. Every ton of ore tithed displayed with its spot market price, and the percent skimmed as gratitude convenience. Every hour of bond labor rose in columns next to the gross of the house that owned the contract. We didn't hide the cost of our plan either. The mirror showed our remedy's immediate reductions and the pain they would cause to ascendancy flows. Now, I said, voice steady, we return costs with receipts. And we record who pays. Numbers do not hate you. They only reveal what you hate. The mirror sent its first pulse. House Zeth's siphon narrowed by 5 points. The Medical Guild's margin dropped 6. The Orphan Fund's receipts' real aid and real cynicism braided together fell by 3 and surged back when the gate voted to contribute voluntarily under new terms. The dais lights strobed once, then steadied as the grid took our shaping like a river accepting a new bend. Varkeef's hands were quiet at his sides. His guards didn't shift. The proxy smiled, a small man smelling victory in the fine print. Observation House. Zeth has already filed a property claim on your arrays under anticipatory failure doctrine. Rios blinked. That's not a doctrine. It is now, the proxy said. You cannot negotiate with a man who writes new rules in his sleeve while you're speaking. I looked at Cantor. He looked at me. Between us, 1,000 hours of arguing philosophy in bitter tea and long corridors crystallized like frost on a rail. Teach until their ink runs out before your breath. Varkef did not flinch, but a tremor moved across the proxy's mouth. House Zeth's counsel appeared inside the corridor like a blade arriving late to a feast and expecting applause. He wore the ash gray of contract guilds and the thin smile of a man who likes debt more than dessert. You have bound yourself, he said, baton voice smoothed to velvet, to a bond posted in ignorance of anticipatory failure doctrine. Under customary practice, your arrays are already encumbered. Customary practice isn't doctrine, Rios said. Show the article. Counsel did the thing lawyers do when asked for the page. He gestured broadly at tradition and hoped no one would demand ink. Pages that don't exist can't shackle a city. Open your citations, said. If you cannot, you may withdraw the claim and save face. Withdraw counsel laughed once, dry as chalk. Commander, in our system, to withdraw is to confess weakness. In ours, I said evenly, to fabricate is to confess theft. The corridor rewarded specificity. Cantor divided the sky with 2 panes, ascendancy code references in one, our reconstruction compacts in the other. He lit every mention of bonds, failure, and encumbrance. The ascendancy's pane filled with 5 citations, none of which used the phrase anticipatory failure doctrine. On our side, the compact labeled experiments and bonds by weight, by consequence, by quorum will. Your term exists in habit, Cantor said, not in law. Habits break when witnesses learn the hinge. Chief Okoye muttered. Witnesses leaned in. The child in yellow tucked her chin into her jacket and whispered to the teacher, I caught only a scrap. He doesn't have the page, and felt something in the crowd loosen again. Since you lack the article, Rios continued softly. We move for a preliminary ruling. The bond stands as posted, without anticipatory encumbrance. Any later claim must cite law, not fumes. The proxy hesitated because he liked victory more than integrity, but liked appearing consistent most of all. Preliminary granted, he said curtly. Without prejudice. Without prejudice still puts a chalk line on the floor. House Zeth's counsel pivoted to spectacle. He pointed at the mirror maneuver and raised his voice so the outskirts would hear. Observe the thief in saint's clothing. The Aurora claims to return costs, but every pulse strips noble houses of rightful yield. What is the human word embezzlement? Show your noble expense line, Chief Okoye said, arms folded like locked doors. Counsel paused. You invoice the gate for gratitude convenience, Rios said, tapping his stylus against his teeth. Kindly itemize convenience. Security counsel said smoothly. Patrols, repairs, deterrence. You shot a hauler, I said. He smiled. Deterrence. You cannot call a knife a pillow and sell sleep. Fine, Rios said. We'll price a deterrence at your own tariff. Mirror. Refine line 7. Cantor bled the data finer. Patrol costs. Yes. Repairs. Yes. The ascendancy fixed the very damage they caused and billed it as mercy. Deterrence appeared as a lump sum that mapped suspiciously onto a banquet calendar and a slate of preaching tours for doctrine functionaries. The corridor did not laugh, but Doc 9 did. The proxy lifted his baton sharply. Silence in the gallery. Let them hear, I said. Sound belongs to witnesses. Sound like boots scuffing metal and breath catching at the infant ward and spice bread cooling too fast. Sound like a priest's chime. Sound like a wrench dropped during a rush repair. We had anchored them to numbers. We needed numbers anchored to them. Enough, Varkef said finally, voice flat as winter. We accept the preliminary constraints. We accept temporary remedy pending tribunal. But the ascendancy will not be reformed by street theater. Neither will you, Chief Okoye said. Try a ledger. Ledgers wash power until the die runs out. Day 3 began with the smell of ozone and hot oil. The relay node throbbed as Cantor kept pressure exactly where it hurt pride without cutting jurisdiction. House Zeth responded by flooding the gate with paper claims that felt like a storm of moths made of invoices. They claimed liens on the tide schedules. They claimed liens on school hours. They claim liens on the very shadow a person cast when walking past a sensor array. Diversion, Cantor said calmly. If we chase every moth, we swallow smoke, then set a fan. I said, blow them back where they came from. He drew a line none of us had considered a filing mirror. Every claim filed without an article would be recorded on the public ledger with the label ungrounded, weighted to count against future good faith presumptions. It was brutal in the way sunlight is brutal to mold. The first batch of claims hit the mirror and came back with that word in green letters. Not red, not shame, just exposure. The gate learned to read green faster than sermons. Green entries blinked. Ungrounded, ungrounded, ungrounded. The Ascendancy's clerks slowed. Counsel scowled. Varkef's stones cooled. Observe the index. Cantor said, a scientist pleased by a curve. Their volume drops when their theater has a ticket price. The price of a lie is the receipt you didn't plan to print. At midday, a caravan petitioned for dock. We scanned their cargo and found medicine labeled with that hateful slogan, gratitude serum, bound for compliant districts. Its markup was obscene. Its active ingredient synthesizable from a plant that grew under the gate's ring lights, currently culled as a weed. Let them in, I said, and teach. We did not seize. We did not burn. We bought the shipment at spot price using escrow contributed by the baker, the miner, the priest, the teacher, the dock officer, the nurse, the elder, the apprentice, the hauler, each pledging less than a meal and more than a gesture. We pressed Cantor's printers into service and made 1,000 copies of the serum at cost. The Ascendancy screamed theft. We answered with license law, buried in their own code, emergency compounding during declared shortages, permitted when lives hang and market failures yaw. You declared a shortage. Rios said gently, pointing at the Ascendancy communique stamped yesterday to justify their markup. Your declaration authorizes this act. Unauthorized use of doctrine, counsel snapped. Authorized use of your article, I said. Doctrine is a tool. Tools don't get to choose houses. Varkef did something I had not predicted. He sighed. Not the sigh of defeat. The sigh of a man carrying a ritual up a hill whose angle he had misjudged. Commander Chin, he said quietly. Robes, less like water and more like laundry now. What, precisely, do you want? Not your collapse, I said, your correction. Correction implies error, he said stiffly. So does hunger, Chief Okoye said. Hunger is weather, he said, invoking the old comfort. Weather cannot be tried. Then build roofs. The teacher said from the front of the crowd without asking permission. If you will not, we will. Roofs built by many outlast crowns, worn by few. That afternoon, the tribunal proxy attempted his closing trick, a jurisdiction collapse, since experimental remedy has been accepted provisionally. He intoned, we move to remit this matter to Ascendancy internal process. Foreign jurisdiction has concluded. Denied. I said before he could blink. Remand requires consent by quorum. You forgot to ask the people who breathe. He frowned. They are grateful subjects. They are parties, Rios said. Witnesses withstanding under open beacon. Ask. The proxy had the misfortune to be a bureaucrat with a microphone in front of an audience that had just learned it could answer. He asked. The answer shook the corridor. It did not sound like revolt. It sounded like a vote. It sounded like a gavel you can hear without wood. Jurisdiction remain, Cantor said. Filed. Every time the corridor stamped that word, the walls took on another layer of reality. Reality gets heavy when you load it with witnesses. Night. The smell of stew from a communal pot someone insisted on setting for our crew. Cinnamon and fat, and a pinch of bitter greens because nobody could stop teaching once the day learned their names. I ate 2 spoonfuls and had to walk because standing gratitude has weight. And I preferred to carry it moving. Mara, Cantor said, voice a half-tone more human because we were alone. You asked me yesterday whether memory can hold precedent. Today I ask you, does precedent change memory? If we recorded where their children can read, I said, and if the ascendancy wipes the ledger, then we print it on plates, I said, and on hands, and on how the gate trades with itself. Law is a story that survives even when the ink smears. Stories last when they buy bread and breath. The 4th day brought cost that bit. House Zeth found a friend in an unfriendly place, a neutral relay that had once favored us during Reconstruction, but now coveted ascendancy contracts. It throttled our mirror feed, adding 10-second delays to every pulse. The corridor hiccuped. The crowd's confidence hiccuped with it. We can route around, Cantor said, but the route goes through a field of junk that might scrape our arrays. You're telling me the price, I said. Yes, pay it. He turned the Aurora's neck into the junk slow as prayer. Metal ticked against metal like rain on an old roof. Somewhere in the port spine, a circuit breaker popped, and the air filled with that burned sugar smell of insulation, doing its job and being proud about it. Chief Okoye swore softly and sprinted with a kit. When she came back, her forearm was wrapped in cool gel where a flash kiss had licked her skin. It will scar, she said casually. Wear it to weddings, I said. Scars that teach are metals that don't need brass. We cleared the junk, took the longer way, and the mirror feed resumed. House Zeth's counsel tried to sneer the delay into proof of our unreliability. The gate jeered him into silence, not with rage, but with receipts, a baker holding up his escrow stub, a nurse lifting a vial printed that morning, a miner waggling a bolt labeled Repaired Community Hour. Counsel, Rios said lightly. Your argument seems undersupplied. The proxy glared at him. Mockery is unbecoming. Accuracy is unbecoming to thieves, Chief Okoye said. Thieves hate clocks that ring in public. The 5th day, the Star Court answered. We had fired open beacons to the Reconstruction compacts and the smaller polities that owed us bruises, favors, or simple human curiosity. 3 answered with silence that felt like fear and funding cycles. 2 sent observers. 1 sent a judge, an old woman whose hair looked like iron filings and whose hands trembled exactly when they wanted to, and never otherwise. She walked into the corridor using a cane with rubber feet, and the corridor stood up a little taller. I am Judge Imani Shore, she said. By compact, I accept temporary jurisdiction to hear this public inquiry as a preliminary tribunal with binding effect on parties present and persuasive effect on parties signatory to Reconstruction. Varkef's mouth became a thin, unlucky coin. Method Judge Shore asked, the way a baker asks for flour before accepting your money. I laid out our chalked plate, our mirror maneuver, our bond, our remedies, our receipts. Cantor summarized the doctrine and its destinations. Rios narrated the stays and the escrows. Chief Okoye spoke 5 sentences about cutting power to infants and did not raise her voice because some things you carve gentle so they last. Judge Shore's cane made the kind of sound gavel makers chase and never quite catch. Ascendancy, state your doctrine, your justification, your intention going forward. Varkef did it. He said it all. Clean, without euphemism. Bond labor to clear life fees. Gratitude to 10th generation. Health metrics to ration. Deterrence. 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 The corridor wrote each word on its rails as if feeding a furnace that would heat future winters more kindly. Intention Judge Shore prompted. Order, he said simply. We intend order. Order without consent is just quiet painted gold. Shore nodded once. Remedy proposal stands. Bond stands. Mirror stands. I see no ground to strike any. I will ask one question before I begin to write. Ask, I said. Commander Mara Chin, she said. Eyes like nails. Are you prepared to lose your arrays if the gate's chosen remedy fails? Yes, I said, but I would prefer to win with them. You don't want to martyr your ship, Judge Shore said. We want the gate to graduate, Rios said. Graduations matter when they end chains, not start debts. Shore wrote in the air with Cantor's pen. Words hung like scaffolding and then slid into the corridor's spine. Her ruling did not sing. It spoke. It did not humiliate. It corrected. Gratitude doctrine, as practiced on Halcyon Gate, violated compact norms against hereditary debt and collateralized breath. Remedies adopted provisionally were lawful experiments within posted bonds. The ascendancy retained dignity by receiving public acknowledgement of rescue acts. The gate retained dignity by returning acknowledgments in coin and works, not in knees. Then came the lock. Precedent, she said, and the corridor leaned forward like a room about to learn how to hold itself. Across compact space, rescue debt shall be capped at 5 years with declining percentage, non-heritable, non-convertible to labor, and subject to audit by witness quorum under open beacon. All doctrines to the contrary are revoked where this ledger is read. Precedents are maps that outlast empires. House Zeth's counsel lunged for appeal and found none in a preliminary tribunal binding on present parties with persuasive effect on signatories. He stammered the way men stammer when their weapons are made of paper and someone turned on Rain. You may seek review, Judge Shore said mildly, but this corridor is closed on that point. Enforcement begins now. Return costs. Var Kef stared at the mirror and at his stones and at the gate and at me. I could see the choice cut him invisibly. He could make a scene and lose with blood. He could nod and lose with ink. He nodded. You will ruin me, he said softly. You will keep living, I said. So will they. Living is a victory tyrants don't like to count. The returns began with a sound that was not a chime and not a coin. It was the sound cargo clamps make when released after too many cycles closed. Ori came back, not in shipments, but in canceled invoices. The clinic's account blinked from negative to credit positive with a little 1.3 months of respirators paid. The baker's energy line stabilized with a subsidy labeled Public Works Grid Steady. The dock officer's morale looked like a man unclenching his jaw. Costs landed on us just then because that is how stories keep themselves honest. The neutral relay, angry at our detour, slapped a sanctions veil on the Aurora. Our food barter partner backed out. We cut meals in half for 2 days and watched crew wear thin smiles while their stomachs talked. Chief Okoye's burn blistered and broke when she reached too fast for a hot coupling and refused painkillers because the clinic's new stock wasn't for heroes. Cantor burned a computation array, keeping the mirror stable through a saboteur's virus, and lost a library of voice inflections he'd been practicing when no one listened. His next words came out flatter, and I felt the loss as if someone had sanded a favorite door. Winning costs more when you want to live with yourself after. The Ascendancy tried one last trick. The Reed House proxy announced a ritual of final gratitude whose refusal, he claimed, nullified the entire week. He demanded the gate kneel by name and recite. He expected the corridor to enforce. Judge Shore lifted her cane. Open beacons convert rituals to records, she said. Records do not kneel. The gate may speak. The priest of the little sky shrine stepped forward. He had oiled his hair and trimmed his beard and polished his bell. He lifted his hand and spoke a gratitude that stung and soothed at once. Gratitude for survival. Gratitude for ships that rescue. Gratitude for numbers that now tell truth. Gratitude for a law ship that refused to turn rescue into rule. He never said ascendancy. He never said kneel. He never said please. He said thank you to the people who rebuilt filters, who doctored children, who baked bread at 2 a.m. He ended with a bell tone that made the corridor nod. The proxy tried to object and found no rule for shouting the word no at a prayer that fed no doctrine. Prayers without chains turn into laws when recorded. The week closed. We released the bond because the mirror showed stability trending upward, under remedy fewer hunger flags, steadier energy curves, school attendance rising like a tide after a wind shifts. House Zeth, snarling, filed 100 ungrounded claims to save face. Varkef opened his mouth to lecture and closed it because tired men lose taste for sermons. Before we depart, I said to him quietly, "We have one more filing." He looked wary. "Another trap. A precedent lock," I said. "A small one that makes a big hole in your old pockets." Rios read it. The Corridor of Law Integrity Stamp. Any party opening a corridor must disclose doctrines in plain speech, destinations in plain graphs, and remedies in plain coin and work. Failure to do so converts all ritual speech to non-binding theater for that session. It was boring and sharp. Varkef grimaced and signed. Consent felt like a splinter under his nail. Boring. Sharp things hold roofs up for a century. We walked the docks one last time. The gate smelled like bread and oil and new wires warming. The child in yellow saluted with 2 fingers like a pirate and shoved a folded paper into my jacket pocket. On it, in a hand newly practiced with numbers, she had drawn the chalk plate 4 sticks. Labels short and clean. 1 arrow pointing at a green word confirmed. "Next time," she said, "teach the beginners." "Always," I said. "Teach the beginners so they never need your court." We detached in a rain of petals that were actually paper chits kitchen workers threw because they had no confetti and would not waste sugar. The Aurora spun out slowly through a ring of tugboats that honked like temple horns. The infant ward dimmed for sleep on schedule, and nobody panicked. The relay node hissed a goodbye that wasn't friendly, but wasn't a hiss either. House Zeth's council stared at his hands as if wondering when they had become old. Varkef stood still and dignified and alone in a crowd that no longer reflected his shape. "Set course," Chief Okoye asked, voice rough with too little coffee and too much victory. "Transit to Cirrus Freehold," I said. "There's a gratitude tie there with new paint." "New paint peels faster," she said. "Good," I said. "Less scraping." Cantor adjusted the slipway. The beacon cooled to travel tone. He sounded tired in a way I had learned to hear only after a year of arguing ethics with an intelligence who saw faster than me and felt slower. "Mara," he said, "we have 37 requests for our mirror protocol." "Send the template," I said. "They'll need plates and chalk and voters." He hesitated, and a willingness to bleed. "We can't ship that," I said. "They have to bring their own. You can lend a lens. You can't lend a spine." The slip coils sang. The hull tasted like hot pennies. The gate dwindled to a ring of good intentions and better rules. In the distance, House Zeth filed appeals that would die of thirst on their way to courts with no more appetite for callers. In my pocket, a child's drawing pressed a square warmth into my side, reminding me that numbers are only as good as the hands that write them. Judge Shore's ruling propagated across compact channels, picked up by stations that liked bread and breath more than tribute. Copies multiplied. Rituals cracked. A priest somewhere taught a gratitude that didn't kneel, and a magistrate somewhere counted votes among witnesses and felt the old comfort of inevitability dry up like a stream under a new sun. On the Aurora, we inventoried cost arrays scorched around their edges, a pantry half empty, Chief Okoye's arm with a healing crescent, Cantor's timbre thinner, as if a flute lost one low note and had to invent a harmony. We wrote the costs on the ship's wall in pencil where crew could read and add their own small, proud deficits. Nobody asked to hide the list. Costs kept in daylight turn into investments. We reached transit glass. The slipway opened like a careful mouth, and the ship slid toward whatever doctrine would try to sell us obedience next. I stood at the railing of the forward gallery, smelled the ozone, watched the tiny green of the gate flicker, and let a breath out that tasted like coffee gone cold and victory still hot. The public ledger entry blinked confirmed on Halcyon Gate sky. I thought of my father, who taught me to make arguments in kitchens with broken lights and neighbors who would carry your words further than you dared walk. I thought of Cantor's flattened empathy and how he still chose to stand next to a child while she drew. I thought of Varkef holding a ritual that no longer obeyed him and not cutting the air with his hand as he could have. I thought of scars and chalk and the way numbers sound like bells when you stop using them as chains. In the end, justice is a story that must be legible to the people who carry it from market to clinic, to school, to ship to shrine. We wrote it large. We wrote it clean. We signed it with costs and with receipts. We left it where no one has to kneel to read.